The next step is to think about questions to ask. As you know, we believe that the best salesperson is the one that asks the best questions. And you may agree with that, but you may say, but I just don't really know what questions to ask. This process is going to help you to have clarity for which questions to ask. And the way it works is that going back to sort of how we looked at the value points, and that led us to 3 related pain points, we can look at the pain points, and for each pain point, we can come up with a pain question. Going back to that example of the sleeping better at night equals a pain point of tossing and turning, if that's a pain point that your product or service can help make go away, then a good question to ask is, how well are you sleeping at night? How many nights a week are you tossing and turning? Do you feel rested when you wake up? So those are all good questions to ask based on that one pain point. Now, as we're composing your pain questions, I do want you to be aware that pain can be challenging to uncover for a couple reasons. One is the prospect may have latent pain, which means that the pain is there, but they don't know it. I'll give you an example. Let's say that your product or service helps people that have a gas leak in their car. And you could approach a prospect that has a gas leak, but they don't know it. They don't know it because the car is operating at a decent level. They're leaking gas, but it's not noticeable. So they have the problem that you can help to solve. And if you were to ask a question of, do you currently have a gas leak? They would say, no, everything's fine, because as far as they know it is, but they actually do have a problem that you can fix. So when you're composing your questions, you can try to keep this in mind. For example, if you ask questions of, are you having to fill up your vehicle more than you used to? Are your fuel costs higher than they used to be? When you look at the ground where your car is usually parked, is there any residue or gas on the ground? So those are questions that can help you to identify if there's pain where you think that the pain might be latent pain. Another scenario could be that the prospect is in a state of denial in terms of denying that they have any pain. So maybe you ask them about something that's not working well and they deny that they have that issue. This is just something to be aware of, and it's composing good questions that can help you to identify if there is indeed pain. So going back to this process, we're selling web design to small businesses, and we help in those ways and we solve those problems. We can use those pain points to basically come up with 3 related pain questions. So if we solve the problems of generating revenue through the website, we can ask the question of, how important is it to get more revenue out of the website? How important is it to improve website conversion rates? So those are pain questions. And there's another category of questions that you can ask, which I consider to be current state questions. Now, these will vary depending on what you sell, but here are some examples for this particular example. So if we sell web design services, then you might want to ask, do you have someone that can make changes to your website? Are you currently working with an agency? Are you happy with the person who's making changes? When was the last time you refreshed your website? So you're trying to identify what's going on in the area where you have something to sell. Another example of current state questions would be, if you sold cars, this would be asking, do you have a car today? What year is it? What make and model? Is it meeting your needs? How well is it running? How often do you currently replace your vehicles? So you're trying to identify what's going on there. When you combine your current state with your pain questions, you should have a good set of questions to ask in your sales message when you're trying to generate leads and start initial conversations. And so here are a few tips on composing your questions, because how you word your questions will greatly impact your ability to get the prospect talking and to extract information. So the first tip is to try to use open-ended questions. So it could be very easy to look at your pain points and real quickly create closed questions that start with a do you have, and then you insert the pain point. So for example, if your pain point that you're trying to fix is, do you have trouble sleeping at night? It can be very easy just to put a do you have in front of there to say, do you have trouble sleeping at night? This isn't optimum because the prospect can answer with yes or no, which doesn't get the conversation going. And if they're trying to get rid of you, they might just quickly say no, and then you don't have anywhere to go there. So try to change those to be more open. And one way to do that is to start your questions with, how do you feel about blank? So if we apply that to a different area, how do you feel about the amount of time it takes to train new salespeople? How concerned are you about the amount of time it takes to train new salespeople? How happy are you with the amount of time it takes to train new salespeople? So you're not being very specific saying, how long does it train new salespeople? Because the answer there might mean something different to you than it means to them. You're asking them, how do they feel about it? Another way to phrase questions is to say, how important is it for you to, so how much of a priority is it for you to find new ways to increase website traffic? How important is it for you to find new ways to increase website traffic? When was the last time? How often do you experience errors in your invoice? When was the last time you analyzed your invoices for errors? How often do you reconcile your vendor invoices? So just some ideas there. And then at the end of the day, there are good times to ask yes or no questions when you are looking for a very specific answer, and that specific answer can maybe generate a lead for you or tell you what direction to go with the prospect. But maybe something very specific. Do you currently have a system in place for error scanning? Maybe you help with error scanning and that's a big issue, and just being very direct. That's a closed question. I just said don't ask closed questions, but sometimes it does make sense. Have you ever had trouble synchronizing data across systems? That's a yes or no question. Maybe having a very specific answer there is helpful. Is your process for transferring sales data manual? The other thing with asking questions is you want to keep in mind that when you look at a pain point, that may lead you to composing what you think sounds like a great pain question, but you have to keep in mind that what you're asking about, the prospect may find invasive, and they may find it invasive either because of the type of information you're asking about, or because they have a level of ego and they don't want to share that with you, or they don't want, if something's not working well, it may not shine well in terms of how good of a job they're doing. So for example, let's say you can help with compliance. You might not want to ask a cold prospect if they're in compliance, because they might not want to share that with you, and that might not start a real healthy conversation. So you could soften that with the how do you feel about your ability to meet compliance? So you're not saying, are you in compliance? How do you feel about your ability to meet compliance? How concerned are you about getting fined for compliance issues? So you're not saying, are you potentially getting fined? Are you going to get fined? You're saying, how concerned are you about it? How important is it for you to improve your ability to stay compliant? So that's an example of using those different how do you feel, how important question starter tips to soften something that might be a very sensitive, invasive pain point or area.